Hi, everybody. Welcome to Tim and Veronika's market update. And first, I wanted to talk about market statistics again and tell you what's happening in greater Metro Atlanta. As we all know, these videos on YouTube and articles in the newspapers, the authors are not really spreading the information, but they're spreading the fear and look specifically why they're saying it and what's going on in fact. So,
Yes.
so this is our professional database, multiple listing service for Greater Atlanta area. These stats are helping us to determine what's going on in the market, right, instantly. So when I pulled Greater Atlanta area, and I wanted to show you the dynamics for the past 5 years. And as you can see this line here, the values are decreasing. Wow, why is that? Because we're looking at monthly data. And this is what talking heads are bringing up as prices are crashing. But if you follow this line from 2017 through entire 2022, based on monthly data, you will see that there is it has to do with the seasonality.
Yep.
Every time, what is the hottest season for our market when prices?
But typically it's in the spring season after the holidays. Everybody's thinking about maybe moving because of a job relocation or maybe expecting a child and need the larger
True.
home.
And this is exactly what we see here. The increase in values happening during the year, happening in the second quarter, and then values drop down. It's a seasonal effect. The only difference, the only different thing we saw was 2020, when values started rising and then dropped for in May because of the pandemic, right? And then they rose up slowly, creating the pandemic. The COVID thing basically created the spike of what's going on, what has been happening in 2021 and 2022, because there were almost no sales. People were sitting put, didn't know what to do. And now it's just accumulated a lot of buyers and sellers in the market. This is why we see this spike here. So let's take a look at what if we use a different data parameter and go with entire year, see how the annual median sales price is doing difference. So when somebody is trying to tell you that prices are crashing, they're just using different type of statistics. They're looking at it monthly, not factoring in the seasonality. Guys, I hope it helps. Just let us know if you have any questions. We will be happy to tell you what's happening in your area, even your neighborhood. We can narrow it down to a single subdivision. So we talked about, last time we talked about locking interest rate for 90 days to help offset the rate increase when you're getting a house under contract.
Correct. Yeah. We call that lock and shop. But it basically also protects the buyer from upward trends, interest rate trends, right? So once you're locked, your rate's not going to go higher. If rates improve, like we've actually had a little bit of an improvement in the last 2 or 3 days, and I'd like to assign that to something to do with the election, but I don't think that's the case. I think that people are getting more comfortable with the fact that the Fed's going to probably end their raising of the federal funds rate or the prime rate sooner than they thought, because maybe some indicators are giving them confidence that, the inflation is not going to continue. So the point is, if rates drop after the lock, you have the ability to get the lower rate. If they go up, you're still protected on the upside. So to me, if I were buying or thinking about buying in the next 2 to 3 months, I would lock. And if you never buy anything, there's no cost for canceling the lock if it doesn't turn about. But if you find something and we have you locked and rates improve, you get the best of both worlds. You get the better rate, and you didn't potentially lose because the rates had gone up and you hadn't locked. So I think I'd say it'd be foolish not to look into that as an option, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And the beauty of it is that it's not going to cost you anything as a buyer. And with no obligations, you can just walk out, and you don't need to have a contract on the house, which was a requirement for many years before. We also mentioned before that seller concessions are increasing. And I wanted to share with you what just happened on one of the transactions. Team and I are working together. So on one of my listings, I was representing the seller. Buyer asked for a maximum amount of closing costs that his loan will allow, which seller agreed to pay for, to contribute towards closing costs, because otherwise buyer won't be able to afford and make this deal work. So both buyer and seller understood the benefits, and seller contributed money towards closing costs. Well, not to mention that we rolled it into the price.
Well, of course, right.
But that just has to do with negotiations. In order to accommodate, both parties, to make it a win-win deal, you can roll closing costs amount into the price. Just bump up the price a little bit by 5,000, by 10,000, whatever you think your comparables can allow, and give back to buyer at closing the amount that they need to buy down the rates, or whatever they need to do to make sure that they can have that mortgage approved. Then what happened after the inspection, there were several major issues found to the tune of probably 20,000. And buyer and seller were trying to figure out how to make it work. So team, I called you yesterday and asked for your help and perspective on how we can make sure both parties are happy.
Well, yeah, again, this is one of those times that I think it's fair to say, because of rates being higher, people are trying to buy their rate down, right? They're trying to pay points, they're wanting to pay or willing to pay points to get the lower interest rate. And so what that ends up being, in your case, is a good example. They're going to ask for more in closing costs than you have seen in the last few years. When rates are in the 2s and the 3s, there wasn't as much demand or need for those additional seller contributions. That's changing now, and it's good to hear that your seller was, willing to go ahead and agree with the buyer was requesting. So when it comes to things like this, it sounds like it would be a deal, a walk away situation. If the seller wasn't going to fix these things, the buyer would terminate.
Right.
And move on. Assuming that's true, and also assuming that what's being asked, this is your area, that these are reasonable. They're not trying to pick at things that are not really legit. The net of it is, you should always look at a repair escrow as the best way to solve this problem. In other words, they can't. A lot of times they may not be able to, or may not want to, write a check for something and the house hasn't even sold yet, right? That'd be the worst thing. They fix something for one buyer, and then the buyer terminates, and now they've got something they repaired, and they're not going to get any satisfaction.
This is exactly the case with this current seller.
Right. The other thing is, too, even if they had the money, do I want to fix it if I don't know that this deal is going to go through? Maybe the buyer doesn't qualify. After all this is said and done, the buyer's intent on buying, but they, for some reason, they don't qualify. Something comes up.
Absolutely.
So
That's the conversation we had. Seller didn't want to risk spending that much money without knowing 100% that the deal is going to go through and we're going to close.
Right, and this is not something. So what I'm going to talk about is what's called a repair escrow, which basically allows the seller, either party, to pay for repairs to the property. In this case, it sounds like it would be the seller because they're willing to do that, and the buyers are asking for it. And buyers probably would not want to pay a portion of that. So in some cases, I see where the buyers may want to have something done that is not structural, but we can even do that as a repair escrow. Hey, we want to do this. And anyway, and they can pay for it. The buyer can pay for it after closing. That's a whole different circumstance. But in this case, the reason this is really important is because, number one, the seller may not have the funds, and most importantly, the buyer hasn't yet been approved and ready to close. So what simply happens is we have the party that's going to agree to provide the escrow funds sign an agreement that says, the buyer's going to get quotes for the different things that have to be done, right? The seller agrees to pay for that amount. Let's, you said $20,000. So we'll just have to have the invoices or the quotes for the different, 2 or 3 contractors. And then we add a little bit of money as a reserve because if they get in there and they find something additional that has to be fixed that they didn't know about, we have the funds already set aside. The loan closes, so we get everybody on the same page. We get the contractor's information. When the closing happens, the amount that is being held back is going to be, in this case, held back from the seller. So if the seller was going to get $100,000 as an example in proceeds from the sale, they would now get 80, and the 20,000 would be held in what's called a repair escrow. And all that means is we, the lender, hold the money. And then when the work is completed, because we want to ensure not just the contractor said it's done, we want to make sure a third party says, yes, this sink has been replaced and this plumbing has been done correctly. So we'll have the appraiser go back out and certify that all the work that was listed on the repair escrow has in fact been completed. And at that point in time, we cut a check. If there's anything left for the seller, we cut checks to the contractors, and then let's say the escrow, the little extra that we held aside, we didn't need all of it, we would send the rest of that back to the seller, and the buyer moves into the house. Obviously they can move in right away, but the work will be done after closing, so that the seller doesn't have to worry about whether the buyer can afford the house. The buyer already owns the house. So
yeah, just to sum it up, the benefits for both parties. Buyer gets things repaired without spending any time or money or efforts dealing with contractors. Seller it also gets what they want. The work is done after they moved out, and they can pay with the proceeds from closing instead of putting it on their credit card or writing checks at this point. Thank you, Tim, for saving my deal yesterday.